Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Box Office Talk. This is the show where I break down what happened at the box office, see if my predictions for the top 5 are correct, then make predictions for next week's top 5. So let's get right on into it. Last week, I predicted that number 1 would be Godzilla and Kong, The New Empire. Number 2 would be Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Number 3 would be Dune Part 2. Number 4 would be Kung Fu Panda 4. And number 5 would be Immaculate. And of course, I've gotten all 5 of my predictions right for this weekend. There were a couple new releases that snuck into the bottom 10, but obviously there was never a point where it looked like, anything could rival what could be in the top 5. The only thing maybe would be switching the placement on some of them, which some of you did try to predict, but ultimately you were wrong. Sorry. Here are the people who got their predictions right for this weekend. Congratulations. As you can see, there's quite a bit. So, everyone got it. I mean, it was a little easy just as far as Godzilla and Kong, but you never know as far as how well Dune is holding over and all the other movies. So let's just dive right on into what actually happened and, potentially talk about what could be happening next. Number 1 was, of course, Godzilla and Kong, The New Empire. It actually beat industry expectations. Originally, it was kind of looking like 45 million to 55 million. That's kind of like the worst and best case scenario for the 3-day weekend. But somehow, this movie just really broke through and got a lot of people in. So instead of making 45 or 55 million, it made $80 million for this 3-day weekend. Obviously, this is a really great one for the Easter weekend as well. So because of people getting off from school or coming back home from school, stuff like that, and maybe just people looking for something to do on Easter Day, obviously that'll boost up the numbers for a movie this weekend, especially something like a blockbuster like Godzilla and Kong already. But this really got a lot of people in, and despite the fact that it did get a divisive reception on the critics side of like Rotten Tomatoes and just, reviews in general, a lot of the audience members really came away enjoying that. So there you go. I mean, I remember when I saw it Thursday night. I remember like that was a long time ago. It was 3 nights ago. And there was a lot of like families there, like a lot of kids that were like excited to see it. Not so much that they disrupted the movie, but just you could tell they were just really stoked to be there. So I bet, similar to like what's kind of happened with Ghostbusters, now the MonsterVerse films are now kind of pivoting more towards like a family, not necessarily like strictly kids, but more like anyone in the family can kind of see these monster beat 'em ups, which is, good for business, obviously. Worldwide, it is sitting at a total of 194 million right now. According to Wikipedia, the budget is listed at 135 million. That seems pretty low, like in comparison to some of the other films, but apparently, as of right now, that's what this budget is. So the fact that it opened a little under 200 million worldwide is obviously a fantastic start. It will need 270 million to double this initial production budget, which obviously it's going to do. It'll be interesting to see how well it holds over next weekend. Not that there's a whole lot of like family-friendly competition. Next weekend we have Monkey Man and The First Omen, which have their audiences, but not necessarily all demographics, which is what Godzilla and Kong was kind of trying to aim at. So it'll be interesting to see how much more it makes. Obviously it's going to double its budget, but how much more is it going to make at this point? You know what I mean? But this is a really great thing, because the thing about Godzilla vs. Kong, when that came out 2021, it was one of the first, if not the first, no, I guess Wonder Woman 84 came out a little bit first, but Godzilla vs. Kong was one of the first ones to be released on Max, but also in theaters wide during, COVID, people getting their vaccines, but not everyone has it yet. You still got to wear your mask. But that kind of broke through it in a point where people were like, I don't know if this franchise is going to keep going. We'll see what happens with that movie. But people were really stoked to see that. And obviously it didn't make as much as it could have because of the HBO Max thing, but it made quite a lot more than other movies that were released on Max versus in theaters too. So this one also kind of had to prove itself, just as far as it wasn't just a one-time thing with versus Kong, like that sudden rejuvenation. We can keep this kind of going, the connection with the audience. And that's exactly what they did here. And audiences have enjoyed it so much that they've gotten other people to see it. Clearly, I'm sure they'll be talking about how fun it is. It's something to go see just to be entertained, bring the family. So there you go. I know they were kind of talking about the potential for more recently, but it looks like they're going to have to start making those plans more official. For the MonsterVerse, actually, it is the second highest opening weekend behind Godzilla 2014's 93 million opening. So it had a opening weekend 19 million over Skull Island, 33 million over King of the Monsters, and 48 million over Godzilla vs. Kong. So that's the kind of rejuvenated fan base kind of attention we're talking about here, especially for the year 2024 too. It is the second highest opening of the year, 2 million under Dune 2. Not like 20 million or 30 million, 2 million below Dune 2. Like, That's pretty crazy, you know? Right now it needs 20 million to outgross the entire domestic run of Godzilla vs. Kong, and then it'll have other movies to outgross. Worldwide, as I said, it's 194 million, so it needs 189 million until it outgrosses King of the Monsters, which is the lowest grossing worldwide film in the Monsterverse. Not Godzilla vs. Kong, oddly enough, since that was the COVID one, but yeah, that King of the Monsters did not do that. That was kind of fascinating how the drop off of that happened, but you know, we're back. We're back, baby. Even if I wasn't, you know, the biggest fan of it, I prefer the other movies. Anyways, that's not a conversation for now, obviously. Number 2, though, is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Now, I was wondering, how is this going to hold over? You know, this and Godzilla, they can coexist, but will one be prioritized over the other? And it looks like that's kind of happened here. I'm not going to rule out that this movie can't continue to hold well in the next coming weeks, because, you know, maybe people saw Godzilla and Kong now, and then they'll see Ghostbusters later. You know, some schools are off for the next week, you know, at least the high schools around here, as far as I know, are off for the next coming week, so plenty of people have time on their hands. Either way, the holdover was not great from last week, and it had about a 60% drop off, making 15 million, adding to a domestic total of 73 million. It's still behind Ghostbusters 2 by 39 million. Worldwide, it did cross over the initial production budget of 100 million, now sitting at 108 million, and now needs 95 million until it outgrosses Afterlife. So it's making its way still. It still needs to double this initial production budget of 100 million in order to be considered a success. I believe I talked about this last weekend, but Afterlife did squeak over the 200 million point. That was another example of, you know, releasing a movie in 2021. It's a little bit before the big boom of Spider-Man No Way Home, but it did pretty well for itself, especially on a budget of 75 million. So it's going to be interesting to see if this one can actually, you know, cross over that point. If there's any other territories it still needs to be released in. That's one of the things that people kept talking about with 2016 Ghostbusters and then Afterlife, is that a lot of movies, when they're released worldwide, a lot of revenue can come from China, but China has a no ghosts policy. And believe it or not, Ghostbusters has plenty of ghosts, so a lot of their revenue has to be relied on every other place, especially domestically. I think it's fair to say domestically is where people care about Ghostbusters more than any other place in the world. I could be wrong about that, but if I'm gonna make a guess. So if it can continue to hold over well, you know, that's way better for it. If not, then we may be looking at a scenario where they don't continue this specific storyline of Ghostbusters and these characters. Maybe they try something else, or maybe they just let it rest for a bit. I don't know. So right now we're kind of in an in-between spot. It'll be interesting to see if our number 3 film, Dune Part 2, will overtake it next weekend, because this movie is still holding very well. Ghostbusters had like a 60% drop. This movie only had like 20 to 30% drop. Like, it is still holding over so well in these weeks, you know, with all these other movies coming out. You know, it still has a strong fan base going in and seeing it. People have spread the word and people are interested. They want to go see it. Made 11 million this weekend, adding to a domestic total of 252 million. Worldwide, it is sitting at $626 million. So there you have it. That's where we're at right now with Dune Part 2. And it did triple its initial production budget of 190 million when it got over the 570 million point. Now it just needs to get to 760 million to quadruple it. I think it potentially has a shot here. I know it's slowing down a little bit now because it's been almost a month since it released, and it's, you know, slowing down just a little bit, but we may have a shot here to really quadruple it. If we're really lucky, maybe make 5 times that initial production budget. But just seeing this movie's success is so cool. Similar to the Godzilla vs. Kong thing, you know, this movie really had to prove that the first Dune success wasn't just a because of COVID thing, you know, and obviously both movies have done really well. Number 4 is Kung Fu Panda 4, making 10 million, adding to a domestic total of 151 million. It has finally domestically outgrossed Kung Fu Panda 3 by 8 million. It now sits behind 2 by 14 million, so just a short distance there until it sits behind the first film's domestic run. Worldwide, though, it is sitting at 347 million. Obviously still very good for the film, but it is behind Kung Fu Panda 3 by 159 million, so it still has a longer way to go worldwide until it outgrosses the other entries in the trilogy. But like we've mentioned, the budget is pretty low because of corner cutting. But, you know, that's neither here nor there, obviously. You know, so either way, there's still a success for this film. It's just worldwide compared to the other ones, it might not be as much. But domestically, it's kicking ass, so there you go. And it actually did quadruple its initial production budget now that it's past the 340 million point. Now needs 425 to get to another milestone of making 5 times that budget. So worldwide, it may not be outgrossing these other entries, but domestically and then also just for its own self, it's doing pretty good. So there you go. Number 5 is Immaculate. Still very interesting to talk about here. It made $3 million this weekend. Obviously a pretty good hold for a follow-up to the opening weekend, which was like $5 or $6 million. So that kind of circulation of people talking about it, people interested, like, what was this movie? People are kind of talking about it. Horror fans really liked it. So, you know, people are just coming in. I literally checked, because when I saw Immaculate last weekend, it was like a really small theater. I checked like the seats for this weekend. They put it in a slightly larger theater. Just goes to show you how much more interested people were to see it this time around after hearing the buzz. But yeah, made $3 million, adding to a domestic total of $11 million. Worldwide, only a little bit of a bump, sitting at $12 million. It still needs about $6 million until it can double its $9 million budget. I'm thinking since there is a little bit more of worldwide numbers and still people kind of talking about it domestically, I think it'll like be able to sneak by, but just as the years go by and it comes available on streaming and DVD, people will keep talking about it, and then the legacy lives on. It's especially going to live in the legacy for Neon. Domestically, it has outgrossed Spencer by $4 million and the Apollo 11 documentary from 2019 by $2 million. So it is now in the top 5 highest grossing domestic runs for Neon of all time. It sits behind the documentary 3 Identical Strangers by $1 million. And then worldwide, a little different, even though there is only like a $1 million difference in the totals. It has outgrossed the Apollo 11 documentary by a couple $100,000, and it sits behind 3 Identical Strangers, Perfect Days, and Moon Age Daydream by $1 million. And once it gets to those, it'll be in the top 10 for Neon's highest grossing worldwide run. So yeah, this is just a movie that's going to live in infamy. Especially how Sydney Sweeney took the chance to promote the film after she buried Jeff Snyder. At number 6, we have Toulouse Square. This is one of the ones that was new, and I didn't know about it, but it didn't up in the top 5, so we're good. Made $2.5 million this weekend. I'm not sure what the budget of this thing is, but look, it got into the top 10, you know? Someone knew about this movie. Number 7, we have Arthur the King, making $2.4 million, so I guess maybe there's a possibility it'll edge out Toulouse Square if, you know, official numbers in the next coming days say otherwise, but I like to think that a movie that no one has heard of was more appealing this weekend than Arthur the King. It sits at a total now domestically of $19 million, which is the exact production budget of this thing. But, you know, for this show, you need to double that budget to be considered a success, and there's still no worldwide totals to bump it up, and this movie has just lost so much momentum, it's kind of like, you know? It's still here, though. Number 8, we have Late Night with the Devil, still here from last weekend. Still not sure what the budget of this thing was, but, you know, making $2.2 million this weekend, and now adds to a domestic total of $6.2. It is an indie film, and even though they do have an actor like David Dismalchin, and even though Dismalchin isn't a household name, people like me who just love movies recognize him and know him from stuff. So I'm sure it cost a little bit, but it is still an indie film, so it's not going to cost a whole lot. So I'm thinking $6.2 million, that might be okay. You know, I'm not sure. You know, I don't know the specifics, and, you know, not knowing the initial production budget doesn't help, but I think this movie's in a pretty good spot, and similar to Immaculate, people will keep talking about it. It'll live on in infamy. Number 9, we have Crew, another one that came out of nowhere, don't know what this is, but it edged out our number 10, which I think is pretty funny, which we'll talk about in a bit. But this movie made $1.7 million. Once again, don't know what the budget of this thing is. What is it with movies hiding their budgets? Well, I mean, I kind of get why, but sometimes it's like, please let me know. I would like to know so I can write it down and state it in a video. I'm just happy that this movie edged out number 10, which is Imaginary. The last time we're going to be seeing this masterpiece by Jeff Wadlow and Jason Blum, making $1.4 million. And this isn't even the Arthur the King Toulouse Square one, where it's like, well, it's only 0.1 off. Like, Crew kind of cleared Imaginary pretty well. But that adds to a domestic total of $26 million for Jeff Wadlow. It outgrossed Never Back Down by $2 million and Fantasy Island by a couple $100,000, and now sits behind Kick-Ass 2 by $2 million worldwide. Slight bump, sitting at $32 million. It is still behind Never Back Down here by $7 million. So at the very least, they're $4 million away from tripling that $12 million initial production budget. So there you go. Another small-scale Blumhouse success, sort of. Now it's time for the fun part, the predictions for next week's top 5. Number 1, I am once again going with Godzilla and Kong, The New Empire. But once again, I will be interested to see just how well it holds over. But then number 2, I think, will be The First Omen. I think, you know, horror movies, so those are already pretty popular. But I think, especially with, like, recent buzz on Twitter, like, I've seen people on Twitter post like horror fans post like how much they loved it. So it's like, I think that'll get people talking, and we might not obviously to the same level of Godzilla and Kong, but I think we will see a pretty good boom for that movie, you know, a pretty good attention for it. And then number 3, I think, will be Monkey Man, or at least I hope so. Sometimes these original films just fucking flop and don't get as much attention, especially like an original action movie. I'm hoping that the buzz around Jordan Peele saving it from a Netflix release, and how much work Dev Patel put into making the film, how many like bones he broke while making it, and the troubled production just to get it out there. I hope that that has some good buzz around it. Number 4, I think, will be Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, and then number 5, Dune Part 2. But what are your predictions for next week's top 5? Leave them in the comments below, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.